Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Lee. Djrum. Hard to say Tournesol. I'd love to see more discussion about electronic music on your channel. This 2-track EP pulls from a lot of different styles, including techno, ambient, jungle, and UK garage. Alright, so let's listen to this double track here. Hard to say Tournesol. And see where this takes us. This is Djrum. Great use of a wide soundscape with a lot of these sounds out on the periphery. Yeah, really nice use right there of narrowing down a sound, our bass kick specifically, and then bring it back up to full width to create some diversity there. Speaking of that bass kick, it is massive. Yeah, once again we shifted phrases by narrowing up a sound and then bring it back to full width. Is the bass kick moving around for anyone else? So there's a lot of fun effects going on, but working within a limited palette. I'm interested to see where this goes in the next half. Alright, we're losing layers. Before we start this next one, this is something that I'm typically pretty lenient about multiple songs in a single request if they run together. Or I guess not necessarily just if they run together, but if they're designed to be listened to connectively. Specifically, if they're movements that just happen to get separated in the track listing or something like that. But hard stops, that's typically where I draw a line, one song per request. But the way that this was written, I read this to be, either one track that had two titles to it, or two songs that were designed to be listened to together, two movements of the same song. I'm going to go through and listen to Tournesol, since I didn't catch this beforehand, but I do need to be a bit more vigilant about this, I suppose, if it's that easy to get something. And I'm not saying that Lee intentionally did this and tried to, get two songs for one request or anything like that. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, the request clearly states it's a two-song EP. But I guess I do need to do a little bit of, because usually I add the request to the spreadsheet, I add the link to the spreadsheet, I screenshot it and throw it in a folder. I don't really do much reading on it. I just assume, everything's following along with the typical rules of it. And this is just a case that maybe I need to have a little more oversight on it just to make sure we don't end up with something like this again. And again, Lee, I'm not upset at you, and I'm not saying you did anything like that either. I want to say a couple things real quick about Hard to Say, but most of this I'm going to do a full analysis of the songs together at the end. But just in case I forget anything, Hard to Say, very minimal. a lot of use of effects to change the sound of the song rather than new sounds and timbres. Um, and it makes the song, it gives that song that minimal effect, at least to my ears, which works very well for the dancey aspect, which is where we get that very powerful prominent bass kick 4 on the floor style. Um, for critical listening, I found it was a bit underwhelming, but I think I've just been spoiled with high octane electronic stuff, um, that I'm just used to, 100 different sounds in each song. Uh, and here we had, a nice condensed 6 or 7 different timbres, and they were just played around with different aspects of the sound itself rather than pulling in an entirely different sound. I'm going to try to keep that in mind going into Tournesol and see if I can approach that one a little differently since I know what to expect now. But I'm not thinking there's going to be a lot of analysis on this one unless Tournesol is massively different from Hard to Say, in which case it's good dance music. Maybe not necessarily great music for deep analysis like I would apply to it. A producer might be able to dig into how these sounds are created, and there might be some really deep conversation about that. But coming from a theoretical and compositional angle, it's a very repetitive song. So, all right, so this is Tournesol then. Yeah, and much like Hard to Say, there's a really cool intro here. I wonder if we're going to stick with this variety or if we're going to find something more comfortable to settle down into. I can't not hear that as a digital metronome. I'm fairly certain that it was not accidentally left in there, but it kind of sounds like the metronome got exported with the track. The only difference is that the woodblock is a consistent attack, where usually the first beat is going to be emphasized in the metronome. A digital one, anyways. A real metronome doesn't really have much emphasis. It's really interesting that both of the intros have had a really interesting soundscape-based introduction to the track, and then eventually resolved down into something a bit more standardized. very overwhelming right here. Ooh. Yeah, this is a treat. We got a lot of sonic variety here that we really haven't had for a while. Really fun use of compression and width here. Like these temporary moments of squeezing the sound sphere. A lot of contrast between filled and diminished space usage. All right. Like 60% of that, I think I can just copy paste some of my analysis and criticism and general talking points about hard to say. There is a good portion of the middle of this track that is primarily focused on creating a drum beat with a few ideas that circle around it, and modifying values and attributes of these sounds to produce a bit of variety to a static idea. And there is something very cool to be said about that in particular, even if it isn't necessarily my favorite kind of electronic music. It is pretty cool to lean into one idea and fully explore it as best you can without adding in additional variables. It's a type of minimalism that I think is an interesting exploration, and it's also a very cool restriction in a genre with limitless potential for timbre. When you can add, or when you have maybe not even millions or billions, but maybe an infinite amount of sounds at your hands, at your fingertips, why wouldn't you opt to have hundreds, 200s, thousands of different sounds in your song? So to say, I'm going to disregard that. I'm going to pick like 6 to 10 sounds and make a song based on that. In fact, I'm going to make one section and lean into it and fully explore all these sounds and the parameters that build them. I think it's fascinating to create music with those restrictions. Um, and, equally fascinating is not just that it was accomplished, but that there is movement and direction through these parts of the song. The bass kick continues to move, the atmosphere continues to exist, the melodic chirping, it doesn't change, but the song does move and flow and evolve, even though the MIDI notes themselves are not changing. It's just the parameters of the synthesizer that are. It's just a very neat way to go about crafting a song and fully exploring while pushing one's compositional strength or compositional boundaries. Um, but those are not the parts of the songs that really excited me. I was a much bigger fan of the intro to both of them, as well as our outro to Tournesol, where we experimented with more than just the timbre of a handful of sounds, but multiple timbres as well as the overall production. Um, there's a lot of really cool soundscape toying around with that goes on in these, where the soundscape itself, which is a fairly static idea in a majority of music we listen to on the channel, is in flux. The creator, the producer, has just as much control over the shape of the room around the instruments as much as the instruments themselves. Imagine being able to record an orchestra and to modify or completely change the hall that they are performing in, which is going to drastically change the acoustics of the sound, which is going to mean that the instruments can be the same thing. They can be playing the same thing, and yet the end result is going to be different as the song evolves, as you transport them through time and space or alter the reality around them. And that's exactly what's happening here. We have all these modulations of the sound sphere, of how wide it feels like these instruments can, or how much space in the room these instruments have. The instruments themselves can grow and shrink in width, but what if we could grow and shrink the amount of space around them? And that's where we get these really cool ideas, like at the end of Tournesol, where it feels like the song actually loses space on the periphery and everything kind of gets sucked in, black hole style, to the point that there's actually silence on the panning. There's silence on the outskirts of the song, and it's immediately filled back in. It's super bizarre. It's like, I don't know, it's almost like a TV, an old timey tube TV. When you turn it on and the picture kind of comes in from the center and kind of expands out. And when you turn it off, it just kind of collapses back in. Um, it's just phenomenal. The amount of control that that this producer has over not the instruments but the space around them, squashing and stretching the height, changing the width, uh, moving instruments around in like a 360-degree field. Sounds were above me and below me, behind and in front, and of course to my left and to my right, which are fairly typical panning ideas, whereas the Y and Z axis are not used quite as much in most music. Um, and we started to hear a bunch of ideas coming in with varying properties, almost again like there's some sort of metamorphosis going on to these ideas where the MIDI notes are not changing at all, but there's so many different parameters that are fluctuating that the sound takes on different shapes and vibes. um I don't even have a metaphor for this one. Like some amorphous blob taking shape and losing it, or quickly shape shifting between different ideas, where not none ever really takes full form. It's always an amalgamation of multiple shapes, where you can kind of get the idea of where it might have been going, but before it fully formed, it's already begun to shift into a new shape. Um, it's really bizarre, and I wish I had more experience or vocabulary or even just the ear to dig more into this. Like I mentioned earlier, I think an engineer might have a lot more to say about this, or a producer might be able to dig in a little bit more about how some of this is being crafted and why it's cool because of the techniques being utilized. And all I can really say is that it's fascinating. I don't know how any of it's done, not technically. I know synthesizer tones have a lot of parameters to them, uh, width and shape and presence, panning. There's probably a lot more resonance, ambience. I don't know. Uh, I play around with the synthesizer, but I mostly use preset stuff because there's so many dials and ways to modulate. It's just there's a lot of understanding and control in the put on example basically in these two tracks, specifically in these more atmospheric sections, um, of how to make some really cool stuff utilizing synthesizers. And especially at the end of Tournesol, there is so much variety of timbre. There's sounds that come in and immediately fade out, and some that stick around for a little bit longer. But this is that type of hyperactive electronic music I was talking about during Hard to Say that I prefer. I say I've kind of been spoiled by it. It is the epitome of like novelty based electronic music where it doesn't matter if you're bored 1 second because there will be a totally different song in the next second. Um, and this was not as extreme as that, but definitely leaning into that direction of more frequently introducing new ideas rather than sort of the minimalistic approach we saw during Hard to Say and the beginning half of Tournesol. Um, So yeah, I wish I had more to say about this, but it's a bit outside of the scope of my typical analysis, and I don't quite have the ear to break down purely electronic music like this in a way that I feel would be entirely in depth. But I think I pointed out a lot of the cool things going on, and if you enjoyed this, hopefully I've given you something to chew on and maybe some terms to look up if you wanted to dig into it a bit further. Those are my thoughts on Djrum's Hard to Say and Tournesol. This is where y'all come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this or not, anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on. Let me know. And there's probably some stuff I need to be corrected on. I was a bit out of my depth here. Um, oh, I didn't. It's not really a big topic, but I do want to say that it's really cool to find this middle ground between what I think is listening or maybe trance-like techno and dance techno, which is designed, for clubs and stuff like that, dance mixes. I thought this was really interesting to have that bit of an in-between there where it feels both passive at times and active at others. And sometimes both simultaneously. Like I could see people dancing to it or just chilling out to it. Very cool finding that middle ground between those two. Anyways, above the comment section, description box, there's a link in there for Linktree. It takes you to this menu here. It has links for everything related to the channel. You can find multiple ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord community, and a link to my music. If any of that interests you, there's also a bunch more in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to look at some more unexpected favorites and another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.